Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining the Episcopal Parish Network for this special webinar, digital workshop with Monica and Caroline on philanthropy and discipleship and stewardship in the 21st century. We are so pleased to have you here with us. My name is Joe Swimmer. I'm the executive director. I am in a hotel cube, so there are people walking around behind me. I apologize that I have to have a bit of a hushed voice, but want to make sure to add my welcome, which we are so grateful that you are taking time to join today. If you would, please post your questions and comments for our panelists in the chat feature and not in the Q&A. The chat feature allows us to capture them and make sure that we're able to answer them if we can't get through them all while the session's going on. We will have additional sessions coming up in the next few weeks, so keep an eye on that at our website and sign up for our mailing list. Also, please consider joining us for our special stewardship pre-conference at the Jacksonville Annual Conference, March 8th through 11th in Jacksonville, Florida. More information about that will be coming, and registration opens on October 1st. The last comment that I would make is, if you are inclined, please put your name and parish and city and state where you're writing in from into the chat, just so we can get to know you a little bit. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Monica, and we'll get started. So thanks again for joining. And Monica, thank you for handling this along with Caroline. All right.
Thank you, Joe. It's such a pleasure to be here today. I think we're going to start by just giving you a little bit of a brief introduction of the two of us. So Caroline, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Caroline Marock, and I am the Director of Stewardship at St. Michael and All Angels Episcopal Church in Dallas, Texas. And I have been with St. Michael now for about 5.5 years. And it has been a joy to be a part of EPN and getting to know so many of you over this time.
Great. And I'm Monica Bouda. I'm the Vice President of Development for the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine in New York. For about 16 years, I was in development at Johns Hopkins University and Medicine. And for the past 10 months, I've been here at the Cathedral at St. John. And I have a little bit of background also in even though the bulk of my experience was in academic and medical fundraising, I have a little bit of insight into parish and church fundraising because my husband is an Episcopal priest, rector of the Church of the Holy Comforter in Maryland. So one of the things that I've noticed over time was how, in some ways similar, our practices were in terms of walking with parishioners in their faith journey, and also the way we as development professionals walk with our donors through their philanthropic journey. So I wanted to just set a little bit of expectation about sort of how we're pitching today's session. It's not going to be necessarily a toolkit that you can walk away with certain programs, but really more a contextual, how do we look at philanthropy and how do we look at discipleship? And how do we grow those two together? And so it will be a little high level and conceptual, but then we will have probably follow-up sessions that can take a deeper dive into each of the areas that we're going to talk about today. So what we're going to talk about is not necessarily part of your stewardship campaign, your annual stewardship campaign. It's really about taking an intentional walk with your parishioners through their spiritual growth and their path on discipleship, and how they are called to respond through their philanthropy to Jesus' call to us. So for our purposes today, we're going to talk about discipleship as becoming a student of Jesus and his teachings and his way, and also the discipline of how we are called to act on that. So I think it's looking at it in two ways. I'm going to move to the next slide, Caroline. And one of the things that we often feel about fundraising and philanthropy in the church is that it's slightly uncomfortable. So it can feel a little bit icky sometimes and transactional. And so I like to use this story of the rich young man and Jesus as a way to frame it in more of a call into transformation and a call to be something more than people think they can be. So in this slide, we all know the story, and I think that it's important to understand that Jesus isn't really just asking this rich young man to give him money to fund the soup kitchen, right? He's really inviting him into a relationship that will expand his heart, expand who he is, and how he can impact the world around him. And I think that within this story, I see all of the best elements, actually, of philanthropy and fundraising. To be a fundraiser is a very privileged position, I think, and I've loved my career in philanthropy because when it is done with intentionality and with care and with regard for the donor and the parishioner, it's very life-giving, and you are in this privileged position to really be able to tap into and share people's deepest values and what they want to become in the world and how they want to leave a legacy in the world. And I think every element of this story actually touches on that. I'm going to share with you a couple of words that I hope you'll remember because we're going to repeat them through the rest of our time together. This story is really overflowing with the idea of invitation, education, community, and making meaning. And so just really remember those words because we will be coming back to them.
Before we jump on into the presentation a little bit deeper, I just, and to kind of shine a light on those words that, Monica just shared. The thing about that is one of my most favorite things about fundraising in a church world is that it is such a personal journey. And not only in the impact that someone's dollars can have in whatever mission or ministry that we're working to accomplish in your church community, but this is a huge opportunity that as faith leaders, be it lay or clergy, we are given to truly help someone grow in their faith life through their discipleship and their philanthropy at the same time. So it's a great family experience. It's a great individual experience, but it really is just meaningful to the person at the end of the day.
I love that you said that, Caroline, because one of the things I was thinking is, again, we're going to talk about some tools today that people can use or some approaches that you can use in your parishes. But at the end of the day, what I'm hoping folks walk away with is really just understanding that the joy that the fundraising process and the philanthropic process can bring, how life-giving it is, and the intimacy that it can create. So I think that was a wonderful highlight. If this slide looks a little scary to you, I am not surprised. This is kind of shop talk for development folks. And we talk about something called moves management when we talk about philanthropy and how we help donors grow in their philanthropy. And it seems pretty clinical. This slide is actually missing a step. But if I were in the academic environment talking about philanthropy and moves management, I would start with identification, cultivation. So first identifying who are the people that we would want to approach and talk to about philanthropy. This slide moves on to cultivation. There's actually a step, like a 1A in between identification and cultivation. And the word we use for that is qualification. So there's a concept, in philanthropy that talks about inclination and the ability to give. So someone can have the ability to give, but not have the inclination to give. Or they may have the inclination to give, think widow's mite, but they may not have the ability to give. I mean, they may have the inclination, but not have the ability. So qualification is that step in the process where we really look at who we want to talk to and then try to assess, what is the right fit? Do they have inclination and do they have the ability to give? And then once we've identified that person that we think really is willing to enter into that journey with us, then we move into cultivation. And that's where we're really making a match, building a relationship, understanding who the donor or the parishioner is, and creating an environment in which that person can learn about what our needs are, learn about the opportunities to grow in their philanthropy, and explore what is their relationship with their own wealth, and what is their relationship with the church, and what is their relationship with Jesus. So that cultivation space is where that would happen. Then we move on to solicitation and then stewardship. This might be the mind-bending part. We use, in the development world, we use the word stewardship a little bit differently than I think most churches do. Most churches would think about stewardship as just your big annual campaign, everybody's sending in their pledges, your big drive for your annual fund. That's an emphasis on what is your parishioner's obligation to your parish and what is their duty to the church. In the development world, when we talk about stewardship, we sort of reframe that, we flip it, and it really talks about how are we, as someone who has received the gift, how do we thank and make sure that the donors, parishioners feel the impact and understand the impact of their giving. Caroline, do you have anything to share?
You nailed it, honey bunny. Keep moving.
So that moves management model is a little bit clinical, and it really can just be reframed, and we can talk about it in a slightly different way that I think is much more in line with the relational aspect of what we do in both fundraising and in building up the body of Christ. And those 4 phases or 4 buckets that we can talk about are invitation, education, community building, and making meaning. And I feel like these are very similar to the phases that someone who is in discipleship would go through and would experience. And I think our question then as fundraisers is really to think about, as someone is growing in their discipleship, are we also helping them to grow in their philanthropy too? It is really hard to talk about spiritual growth and discipleship without talking about money. We really do become most committed to the areas that we're investing our time and our talent and our resources. So the people, places, and causes that we are investing our resources in, that's where our heart lies, and that's what we're going to invest in the most. And so I think that we have to become really comfortable with having that conversation about how does faith growth, how does that journey match with their philanthropic growth?
The one thing I'd love to jump in and say about that is that really comes with a huge education of what money means in our lives. It is a theological thing of the role that money plays in our lives, but not only money, but just the resources and the gifts that we've all been given by God, that were His first and then ours to return to Him. And so, it really kind of does help the overall conversation to flow one into the other. It is not just about money, but it is about the grace that we've been given, the gratitude that leads us to have the generous heart, and to take that deeper walk in discipleship. And what does that mean in giving back and being the more holistic steward and not just stewardship, the transaction. So it's a lot of the spiritual education of what being a steward really does mean in general.
This is just a teaser slide. We're going to move into talking about invitation, education, community building, and making meaning. But the first part of invitation, I think, is understanding that people want to give and people want to help. A lot of, I think, and Caroline, you probably have this experience too, that when, often people will say to me, how can you ask people for money? Isn't that so uncomfortable? And I respond, no, it is such a wonderful conversation. People want to help. You just have to show them how, and give them a pathway to being connected to our causes and to our communities. So if you look at the people in your congregation, you really just should bear in mind that Americans give, and if you don't ask them, someone else will. All of them belong to school systems, they belong to other nonprofit groups, other charities, and if we're not asking, they're going to be asked by these other places. And so the goal, the key, is for us to really create the kinds of relationships that make them feel very close and invested in our congregations and our church. I want to point out that one of the important statistics on this page is really this, the volunteerism estimate, that 30% of US adults volunteered in 2019. And one of the reasons that is really important is that people want to bring their whole selves into the philanthropic journey. And so that often starts with an invitation to volunteer and to do something for their church in a very hands-on way. And so I think it's really important to understand that even if someone is not giving dollars, all of the, we say time, talent, treasure, people who are giving time and talent, you really, those are people who are really kind of raising their hands to be asked for more. And so don't ignore your volunteers.
So I'm going to jump in here and say, Monica said that's so lovely, and she was so nice about that, and I'm absolutely going to be equally as nice about it too. But the thing of it is, we all really have to remember, we're not asking people for money, we're asking them to be a part of the mission, and the mission grows with money and to fuel the ministry. And so over my time at St. Michael, I've met so many priests who are terrified of asking for money and all this other stuff. I'm like, you're not asking for money. You're inviting them to consider, participating at a level that will have this kind of an impact. And, and so just kind of really keep that in mind as we all grapple with our own obstacles to getting the words out of our mouth, is that you're really asking them to be a part of something bigger along with you. And it just, I'm not going to repeat Monica at all, but everybody else is asking them to be a part of the vision for education or what have you. That is what is compelling, to have people jump in and hand over the mighty mean green. So just keep that in mind.
You could not have teed that up better, Caroline. So the first bucket we're going to talk about is invitation. And I think and this is the hardest step, right? If you think about, I use the word solicitation and invitation synonymously. And this is often the hardest step. And I think probably as church, this is what we do the worst. We don't do this well at all. And I think it's because a couple of things, and I can even say this from the fundraiser's perspective. When we ask for a gift, we may be afraid of damaging the relationship, or we may be afraid, particularly in sensitive situations. So for example, I had worked in Johns Hopkins medicine, and there's a whole body of research and a body of work around the ethics of medical fundraising. And that is because there's such a precious and treasured relationship between a doctor and a patient, that a doctor never really wants to insert the money conversation into that relationship. And we never want a patient ever to feel that they would receive lesser care, medical care, because they weren't making philanthropic gifts. And I think that that's a really translatable experience to church, is that we would never want to feel like we're damaging a relationship between a rector or a spiritual advisor and a parishioner. And we would never want there to be the sense that there's a quid pro quo, that I won't visit you in the hospital unless you are a big donor. And we need to really, I know that is a concern, and I think that sometimes inhibits us from asking. And I think that there are ways that we can work on that, and there are ways to do that, to approach it where we can move past that discomfort. Attitude is everything. And I would say, that, again, this is the main thing I hope everyone walks away with, is that when you approach a conversation, an invitation or a solicitation, that it's with the idea that you are inviting someone, you are opening a door for someone, a doorway that maybe they didn't know existed or they don't understand very well, but that will be a doorway for transformation for them. That through their philanthropy, they will become someone they didn't know they were, or they will become the person they always were meant to be. And I have seen this transformation in my career time and time again. And most people are just waiting for someone to ask, to invite. So I think it's important to keep in mind that invitations, whether it be to ask them for advice, whether it's to ask someone to lead a presentation, a project, whether it's that solicitation, needs to be very personal. And I would take you back to that story of Jesus and the rich young man. That inherent in there was a very personal appeal to him. You know, he told Jesus, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this. What more should I do? And Jesus knew who he was. He looked at him in love and he told him, this is the thing that I ask you to do. It has to be tailored to the person. And so how do we do that? How do we invite head, heart, and hands, invite people into growth? And I think some of the tools here are really, first and foremost, these one-on-one conversations. And now I'm going to get a little technical, because in our field, in mine and Caroline's field, we actually have a measurement around this, because we know this is the way the work is done. And so typically in a nonprofit, someone who is tasked with fundraising and philanthropy is going to be required to make 120 personal conversations and visits. And they will be measured on that at the end of the year. And I'm not saying that every church should implement, metrics like that, although we have metrics like that. My team at the cathedral has metrics for the number of personal conversations and visits that they will make throughout the year. But I think but just keeping in mind that it's really, that's where the work is done. And if you at all have the capacity to carve out time to have one-on-one visits, coffees, lunches, dinners, get to know people. That's where you learn about people's ability to give, about their inclination to give. You learn about their attitudes toward their wealth and their family and their faith. And it's really understanding who they are at their core, so that you can guide them not on their faith journey, but on their philanthropic journey as well. And I would say, don't be afraid to hear no. I think that's part of what inhibits us from making the request and making the ask and an invitation. And that is because we don't want to hear no. We see it as a failure. But in fact, and I bet, Caroline, you have stories about this too, that's just the beginning of the conversation. And I'll give you an example. So I recently asked someone in a leadership position at the cathedral to make a gift to fund music. And she, there's I had no idea. I knew she kind of liked service projects, but I also thought she was very loyal to the cathedral. And so I asked her to make this gift, and she said, no, that's music is not really my area. That's not what I'm passionate about. I really like service projects, something I can get my hands on. And so from my perspective, that's not a no, that's a no, not this. But I learned, and what I thought I knew about her was reinforced, so that now we can have a different conversation in the future.
Monica, I'm going to shed some light on some fantastic comments that have been popping up in the chat and the Q&A. But I really love how Betsy framed what we were talking about a slide before, but it still applies right here. She mentioned, she says, I always train boards in their role in philanthropy, that you are not asking for money. You are a bridge between a donor's generosity to the mission and the impact of the organization. I love that you are a bridge between. So we absolutely are conduits of transformation, like you were saying. So that was wonderful. And then Joe shared this from the Q&A, that someone had commented that money can be seen as profane, versus our faith community, our faith as sacred. When we see all as sacred, this division disappears. And I think that is spot on, because it is all very sacred, that of which we are given, but it is to be shared, and it, can be used to truly build God's kingdom in our communities.
Absolutely. Really, really astute comments. That's great. So after invitation, we get to education. And this is the step whereby, a large part of this goes back to that cultivation segment that we looked at in moves management. And so this is where we're giving people the information and the tools they need to proactively enter into supporting our organization. I'm not sure how many times I've sat down with somebody and simply put numbers in front of them and said, this is how many hungry children there are. This is how much each meal costs. And they're ready to write a check. It's just so easy to educate people about what we need and how they can help. And I think that's the main part. Like I said, people want to help and they want to support you. And you just need to describe to them and share with them where they can make the most impact and where they can make an impact that resonates with their passions and their values. So I think we can help people understand the need, and we can share with them what is the challenge or the need or the vision. Like I said, educating people about, if it's a service project that you're trying to get underway, educating people about the statistics, and then help them see how they can help and how they can fit in. Maybe it's a new building, maybe it's a new ministry. That's more vision, like where are we going? What's the vision? And how do we inspire our donors around that? And then what is the process? How are we going to work either internally or with the community to bring this to life, to make something happen? And then what are the roadblocks? And I think that in particular, being able to share with people who are invested in our mission, what the roadblocks are to achieving it is really one of the most important parts of education. Because again, people want to help, they want to problem solve, they want to remove those roadblocks for you. And then this gets back to something Caroline said earlier, is talking with people about what is the role of money in their lives, and what does our faith tell us about what the role of money in our lives should be and what our relationship with money should be. Caroline, do you want to say any more about that?
Well, I think it was really made clear to me last week during a retreat that I hold for my stewardship committee, where we're talking about the gifts of spiritual gifts that we are all given by God divinely, and then how we are called to use those gifts in the world, and then how we as a church, the church realizes the gifts that it has in its people. And the priest who was giving this talk about just the holisticness of stewardship, he said, the church isn't called to recognize all these gifts and then hoard them in a corner. No, we don't hoard them in a corner. The church wouldn't be using itself to build God's kingdom in the community. And as should we be doing the same. We are called to use our gifts and to be, when we declare that we are a Christian and we are baptized in this faith, we are dedicating ourselves to continually learning along our Christian journey. And so that continual learning of what does this mean? How should we use it, but I mean, really, it is how we should use it. But it's what is the role of money in our lives, and how should our lives be ordered divinely by God to then execute on how we want to share. So
what's that old saying, show me your checkbook and I'll show you what you care about, right?
For real. Try to empty your wallet. It gets interesting.
Right. So some of the tools that we can use to educate our donors about the vision and the needs our information sessions, bringing people together to learn together. You know, the second one here that I want to talk about is a little bit, and I don't know how often you use it in your parish, but it's a little bit more technical, but actually setting financial goals, sharing financial reports, creating dashboards that keep people updated on their that your goals toward fundraising and your your efforts toward fundraising. We often see this like the big red thermometer that shows when we're just trying to raise money for to send our young people on a trip. But those dashboards, those kinds of dashboards can be shared with leadership and with others in the parish and in your community, just in a regular way that makes everyone feel like they are responsible for making the goal and invested in making the goal. Focus groups, conversation series, focus groups, that's a really helpful one to bring people together. And that kind of education goes two ways. We can educate our constituents about our challenges and our issues and our vision, but then we can hear from them in ways that help them to feel really invested in what we're doing and make them feel and allow them to be part of the vision. Conversation series, newsletter articles, ministry fair, and you just really can't underestimate the power of the one-on-one conversation. So I wanted to give you just a little case study, an example of how education works, how it can work. Someone in the cathedral community was actually invited, so I'm going to start with the invitation, was invited into a leadership role by a peer. So it was a peer-to-peer invitation to step into a leadership role. And he did, and at the time that he stepped into his leadership role, his giving was moderate. I think his commitment was there, his faith certainly was there. He's a deeply faithful person. And so he was invited in, he accepted that invitation and stepped in. And then through education with our dean, because of his relationship with our dean and the education that he began to receive about the state of Christianity in the world, about the needs of our cathedral, about a great vision of where our cathedral was going and the role that it could play in the future, he stepped up and made the largest gift that he had ever made for us. And it was a six-figure gift, and it was really quite substantial. And that gave us some seed funding to start moving ahead with this big idea, this big project that we were embarking on. And so that was the education part. Community building, this person then stepped into a role of being the peer solicitor, and he has now helped us solicit other gifts toward this project. So he has in fact been building community with us and being a driving force in bringing other people into the fold. Once he learned really about the roadblocks, so I'm going back to the roadblocks, some of the issues that we were facing in jumpstarting this project, he then stepped forward and doubled this enormous gift that he had already made. He doubled that gift. And this was, along with, because he's now deeply invested and engaged in this big idea of what our cathedral can be and can mean to the church nationwide. And so then when we'll get to the final slide, and I think this is, this is looking ahead, but we recently were able to thank him in a very meaningful way that included a report of where we are in the process with this project, as well as a personal video from the Dean of our cathedral, thanking him for everything that he's done. So that's just a case study of how this whole invitation, education, community building, and making meaning work together.
Monica, I'm going to shed some light on some questions that have come up in the chat that we will come back to. So for those of you that have submitted them, we want to recognize and acknowledge your questions. and keep a record of that. And so at the very end, we'll kind of revisit those and open it up for a bit more discussion. But Eric McIntosh said, what do you think about new missions and ministry focused on low-income communities? What does fundraising and philanthropy look like, especially when most are new Christians? So we can come back to that, as well as how do you move toward year-round giving versus a once-a-year pledge campaign? And then someone from the Q&A asked, how can you recruit people to a stewardship committee? This happens to be my personal specialty, so I'm happy to jump in on that one.
You want to take that one?
Yeah, but we'll do it later. But
Okay.
yes, so we will come back to your questions, friends.
Okay. So invitation, education, building community. All right, this is something that most churches, most parishes are really good at. We have this baked into the DNA, right? We know how to do this part. I wish I had the statistic in my hand, but I had read an article that talked about how particularly post-pandemic people are so hungry for this experience of community, and not just, people can tell the difference between what's authentic and what is just a come on. And so what they're seeking is really an experience of deep community and authenticity. And the 4 attributes of deep community are that it is purposeful, participatory, recurring, and identifies and develops leaders. And I would say that last one is the one that we don't always do very well, that church in general just maybe misses the mark on that one. Some ways that we develop deep community are by sharing our stories, taking time to enjoy one another, taking care of one another, and working together for a better world. And, again, we have so much of this baked into what we do already, but I wanted to talk a minute about the idea of leadership groups and legacy societies, because I think that this is one area that, again, identifying leaders and developing leaders, we really miss the mark on that, because it's often it's such an intentional process, right? And it's often a really time-consuming process too. But one thing that can help with that is, most parishes have a vestry, but are there other leadership groups that can be developed to give people, emerging leaders, an opportunity to step forward if they're not ready to be on a vestry, or they're not ready for that level of commitment? Sort of like looking at a pipeline, right? How do we develop a pipeline of leaders who, by the time they would get to a vestry nomination, have a certain amount of understanding of the church, understanding of our parish, and a certain skill set. There is a statistic that says about 60% of people who volunteer are looking for volunteer opportunities, not only to give back, but also because they're seeking development and growth for themselves. And so when we look at how we can create those opportunities for people, I do think that is hand in hand with their discipleship, because it's really looking at how they feel their faith is calling them to step up and step into whatever Jesus is calling them to do and to be. So, at the cathedral, we have multiple leadership groups. Well, we have our board of trustees, and of course, that's really the highest level of commitment that someone can make to the life of our cathedral. But then just below that, we have something called the Society of Regents that offers people the opportunity to step up and be what we call an ambassador. So they don't have quite that level of commitment that a trustee would, but they can find their voice. They can learn about the cathedral programs, and they can find their voice and become a champion for us within the community. And then just under the regents, or the entry level leadership group, is something we call the 1047 Collective. And this is a young person's group for people from 21 to 40. And that gives them an opportunity. It's really not geared toward philanthropy. It's geared more toward volunteerism, community building, bringing people together. But all, anything, and then legacy societies. We also have a group that is our legacy society. So these would be people who have left us in their wills and estates. But in each of, the leadership groups gives you an opportunity to bring people together in a meaningful way around a message, around your mission, but also find out who are those leaders who are going to step up. And, common development practice says that as you step forward in leadership with more responsibility to your community, your philanthropy increases as well. And that is just something that goes hand in hand.
So Monica, I'm going to jump in here just to recognize that we probably have a lot of people on here that we all are in very different size parishes. And so be it a very small parish to a very high functioning parish, there are different ways that you can talk about or encourage others with you, be it if you're clergy, if you're on staff, if you're a lay leader, to gather other people with you to say, form a either small or slightly robust type of parish ministry council of maybe all of your lay leaders that you all decide what does that look like in service to your ministry area. But then these are also the leaders that could possibly be potential candidates to your vestries. So we do want to recognize and point out that not everyone comes from parishes like mine or Monica's. But, my father is part of a very small parish in a South Louisiana town where there's not even 100 pledging units. So it is a lot of both. And how do we scale? How can we help to equip everyone with nuggets to take back, regardless of your parish size, of crafting the conversation? What can it look like? What are some of those things that you can take and apply regardless of size? So just know that we recognize and we understand that fact.
That's great, Caroline. Thank you.
Super quick, I'm going to add to our list of questions that we can revisit. Will you address fundraising in the current economic climate? Boy, that's a hot question. We're seeing parishioners who want to give but are extremely nervous about the economic headwinds. Janet, we're going to come back to you. Christopher Dennis says, what might be the role of churches in helping develop a larger view of philanthropy, even beyond the needs of a single parish, including new approaches such as efficient altruism, give directly, or charity navigator? Christopher, we're going to come back to you as well.
Thank you. So the final bucket really that we're going to talk about is making meaning. So you have invited people, you've educated them, you've brought them into the community and built a strong community with a culture of philanthropy. And the important, the capstone is, how do you help them to make meaning and understand the impact that they've had and how the philanthropic experience changes the world around them and changes them. And so I think a couple of tools, a couple of ways we do that is, setting aside some time for reflection. Can you bring your a small donor group together, or even with one person, or at your annual meeting, talk about what have you accomplished this year? What have donors done for the church and for the community? What was the impact? Encourage donors to tell their stories. Really help them to understand what has changed because of them, what changed in the world. And then finally, to bring people together to dream about what's next. And I think that's an important part, good stewardship, and this is stewardship with the small s, meaning how do we talk to our donors to make sure they feel thanked and appreciated? And how do we connect them directly with our mission? So part of good stewardship always inherently has the next solicitation baked into it. And that's a really important concept. And how we do that can vary from project to project or donor to donor. And it is an individual thing, but but that's why stewardship is so important, because we thank and we leave the door open for them to give again. And we actually show them how a next gift is going to change things even more. So some of the tools that you can use would be stewardship reports. And I have a sample of a stewardship report here, a picture of what one of the things we do for our Sunday soup kitchen. We have, a quote from a donor at the top. We directly thank the people who have given to us. We make sure, and I want to draw attention to, this third paragraph, the end of the third paragraph down, wherever our soup kitchen served, you were there too. We make sure we draw the connection between the ministry and the people whose philanthropy supported it. And we also educate them. We show them how many people were fed because of their generosity. So I think it's important in some way to have these stewardship reports that really help people understand what they've done. Another great way to do that is video, and that's more and more popular. There's a product on the market, maybe some of you use it, called ThankView, which actually it's like an editing software that allows you to take short videos on your phone and then stitch them together and add graphics and narrative. It's very professional looking. But retreats, team retreats, with your board, with your vestry. And I think, you can get really creative and really by doing things like game nights. We talk about envisioning what's next. The Church of the Holy Comforter in Maryland, one of the things that they did that was really very effective in inspiring their congregation, and they're a smaller, like you said, Caroline, we have congregations of different sizes with us today, and so they're on the medium size. They are, and so brought all of their folks together for an evening to actually play with Legos, and use this as a jumping off point to say, if we were going to build what the church looks like next, what would we build? What does that look like? And it was a very, I think, fun and low intensity way to set people's creativity free and to dream together, to see what have we been, where have we been, what are we doing now, where are we going next. And do you want to jump in, Caroline?
Yep, you nailed it. I've been monitoring the chat, so we're good.
So this is our next to last slide, and it's really just a fantastic quote from a writer, about someone who writes about philanthropy. And I think it really sums up the whole journey of, or all the steps of invitation, education, community, and making meaning. And it also speaks in a way, not necessarily directly to discipleship, but about how philanthropy touches the deepest core of who we are. And when that happens to be our Christian identity, how philanthropy can also bring that out for us. The philanthropic relationship involves your dreams, ideas, talents, in addition to money. And our job as fundraisers, our job as a community, is to create the conditions where donors engage with meaningful growth. And we have to remember that this is, for many people, their philanthropy carries their hopes, their dreams, and their intentions, the mark they want to leave on the world and the impact that they want to have. And so by having meaningful conversations with them that help bring together how they want to live their faith with the needs of our faith communities and our parishes, that really is a powerful combination. And we can be the guides for that. And as someone said eloquently, the bridge for that. And I think it's a really wonderful way a wonderful reflection to end on. And an example that I would offer for this is someone that I talked with recently, a member of our community here, who she's told us that she wants to leave us in her will, but has not documented a gift yet. And documenting estate gifts is really important because it helps you to plan and understand what's coming down the road. And so I met with her to invite her to document her gift, one, to ensure that her intentions for that gift are respected and fulfilled once she passes away. And two, it helps us to understand and to plan. And she said something so beautiful. She said, you know, I don't care where the gift goes. It can be general. It can be for general use. My goal is to ensure that our cathedral continues to always stand as the light of Christ in this community and in this city. And I just thought that, if anything, that was her telling me the culmination of her life's journey and her values and her Christian journey. And I just felt so deeply privileged for her to share that with me. And it was really wonderful. And so she will document a 6-figure gift, and it will be lovely to celebrate with her when that happens.
Super. Well, Monica, I mean, what a beautiful presentation, and thank you so much. And it's been a joy to be with you. Before we jump back into the questions, friends, I wanted to reiterate something that Joe has put in the chat for everyone, just so you know, as maybe not everyone is monitoring that chat. But we have an ongoing stewardship community of practice that we host quarterly webinars for you all to participate with us in. It's open to those serving professionally on staff for stewardship, or those serving as volunteer leads for stewardship as well. If you want to join the email list for this group and hear about when the next meeting is, please send your information to info@episcopalparishes.org with stewardship pros in the subject line. We'd love to have you. We will meet in person at our annual conference, which this year is in Jacksonville, Florida, March 8th through the 11th. And I'm so honored to be working with David Rocchio and some others and Monica to be crafting that Stewardship Pros Smart Start. So anyways, just that is there for you. And be sure he put some info in the chat about more of our digital workshops and what have you. Another quote that has just come in and we'll kind of put in the end so we can answer everyone's other questions with the time that we have left. Someone posted, I'm a little concerned with how often we're hearing fundraising. We are working to develop giving to the parish as a spiritual discipline. I might take a stab at this if I can, actually, because I do think it's important to address, and we will certainly go back to everyone else's questions. And I don't know, I kind of want to ask for permission to do this, Joe. You know, I may just get fired from doing everything else with my answer, but anyone who attends your church understands it takes money to run it. And it takes money to fuel mission and ministry. And it is essential. It is a spiritual discipline. Philanthropy in general, to secular or non-secular organizations such as an Episcopal church, it is a spiritual discipline to give, period. So I respect this person's wish to remain anonymous, for sure. But if you are a layperson or a volunteer, I completely understand your perspective on the concern about fundraising. If you're a clergy person, you know for sure what it takes to run your building and keep the lights on. And that, you know, nothing is free about church, and, you know, nothing is, people don't, unless they're taught about it, they're not encouraged to be a part of it, you know, that kind of thing. And so anyways, that's just my very 25-cent opinion on that. But I just wanted to shed some light on that one for a minute, but I'm happy to talk to whomever that person may be.
I think you're right, Caroline. And I think that's part of that education phase, is helping people understand what part of the mission, how the mission is funded, and what's accomplished by people's giving. I do think that it's also about, like I said, flipping the lens a little bit to if you come to understand fundraising as an invitation and a doorway to deepening your faith, to exploring your own values, I think that's what we've been trying to get at, is that fundraising itself, when you talk about money, it's one of the most personal things that someone can talk to you about. And I think that when you enter into that conversation, you open up a door of intimacy that allows the other person to grow and grow in their faith within the context of giving to your church. And so I do think that underlying is the word discipline, and that's important, but also pupil. Pupil is the root word of disciple, and that's really what we've been talking about, is learning about what the church needs and what Jesus asks us to do and calls us to do. And the combination of what does scripture tell us about that, and what do people through their own prayer life learn about that.
Okay, so with our 3 minutes left, and we may get with Joe, because I did copy and paste everyone's questions into a Word document. So when the PowerPoint is made available to you, maybe these questions and our answers can as well. So we'll start at the top with what do you think about new missions and ministry focused on low-income communities? What does fundraising and philanthropy look like, especially when most are new Christians? Monica, you're up.
I think that might be a private conversation. I think I want to think on that one a little bit. So whoever submitted that question, I think we should talk about it. I think there are probably a lot of ways to approach that. And there's been a lot of talk in the philanthropic world about like the big philanthropists who swoop in and kind of impose their will on communities and things like that, and how development and fundraising should be a much more community-centered approach. And so I think I would like to think on that a little bit. So if we have the name of the person who sent that in, yeah.
We will get back to this. Okay. How do you move toward year-round giving versus a once-a-year pledge campaign?
So that goes back to that idea of those one-on-one conversations. So I think there are a couple of ways you can do that. So we all know the big annual gift. That is a mainstay, and you're always going to have your stewardship campaign and your annual giving program. But to make it a year-round thing, you really need the rector, the stewardship team, the development team needs to be cultivating, having those one-on-one conversations with people all year round, and not waiting for the annual stewardship campaign to invite them into a gift conversation. And I think that is how you can do mini campaigns that are sort of project specific, or you can do these continuous one-on-one conversations that really encourage people to continually think about their giving and then make gifts even when it's not stewardship season.
Okay. I would love for the person to self-identify who wanted to know about recruiting for the Stewardship Committee. I am happy to be in touch directly, but with our 1 minute left, will you address fundraising in the current economic climate? We are seeing parishioners who want to give but are extremely nervous about the economic headwinds.
Everybody is. It's a state of mind. Even some of our wealthiest, I kid you not, some of the people who have the greatest capacity to give have recently told me that they feel poor. So I do think that there is a mindset that goes along with it, and then there's also the reality. And I think it's about just giving at the level you can, and that's going to be different for everyone.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say too, about just make a base pledge if you want, or if you can. Making a base pledge and doing what you know you can do is great, and to build off of that is something else. Okay, Joe would love for me to take a moment in stewardship committees. I say you've got to define what you want your stewardship committee to do, and the roles within that committee are really important. And so to start start small and be as defined as possible. And, you know, that can be the role in the stewardship committee's involvement in your marketing campaign, in your, you know, how you want your stewardship committee to be involved in helping with follow-up phone calls after your solicitations have been done and they've hit the mail. Stewardship committee's involvement in possibly being greeters during maybe your very public month that you have just launched. So there are many different things. I've done a lot of work around this because I have a committee of about 20 people, and we keep it diversified, and we do term limits or defined terms of 3 years for consistency and continuity purposes. So I would love to expound on that some more. And thank you, Janice, for identifying that you wanted to know about that, because I can certainly be in touch with you on that as well. Monica, it is Joe, which if you hop on, it is about 3:02.
Yeah.
Do we have time for one more question, or do we want
Go
to
ahead and do
wrap it
one
up?
more question. Yes, please.
Okay. Last question is, what might be the role of churches in helping to develop a larger view of philanthropy, even beyond the needs of a single parish, including new approaches, such as efficient altruism, give directly, charity navigator, etc. I might take a swing at this one and say this is part of the spiritual discipline that I was talking about earlier of being philanthropic, period, of seeing beyond yourself, getting involved not only with your treasures, but your time and your talents, not only in your parish alone, but in other organizations that maybe your parish is a ministry partner with. So I think the role of a church is to educate. The more we understand about this role of philanthropy and generosity in our lives, the more equipped we are to be compelled to go out and not only make an impact in our own parish, but in organizations in our community. That's my stab. Monica?
Great. No, I have nothing more to add.
Okay. Super quickly, Ashley.
They're asking Joe to post the last slide again.
Yes. Ashley Pratka, she has a question, says, what are your thoughts on asking parishioners to consider multi-year pledges for stewardship campaigns? I have an answer for this one too, but Monica, do you want to take a swing?
I personally love multi-year pledges. I think that they are fantastic tools for planning, for accounting, for knowing that that gift is coming in. What I typically like to do though is pair it, and this is one thing that you know I ask of our leadership boards, is to make your annual gift for the stewardship campaign and then make a multi-year pledge to something else. You know, some other program or some other ministry that's happening in the church. And so, you know, whatever level their stewardship gift is for that annual campaign, it is what it is. And then, you know that you're going to have a multi-year pledge supporting other facets.
My answer to that, Ashley, is we actually recently just talked about that at our stewardship retreat. And the thing that we felt it did was it kind of closed off the conversation year over year. If we had someone who had committed a multi-year pledge, you know, we may, if that's something that you all are considering to do, it's always with the knowing and understanding that your rector may still go back and continue that conversation and possibly ask the donor to potentially increase the next year's gift. So I think it's just to stay away from locking yourself in. So, okay, it's 3:05. Joe, I'm going to toss it back to you.
That was great. Thank you guys so much. The compliments are fast and furious in the chat, and we will post the slides along with the recording. If you registered for this session, you'll get an email announcing when the slides and the recording are posted to our website along with a link. Can't thank Caroline and Monica enough for just this terrific session. You have their contact information in the chat there, and we'll look forward to being in touch and having another session like this on the same subject very soon. Thanks, everybody, and thanks again, Monica and Caroline.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.